Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this Intellidex and South African Chamber of Commerce webinar with outgoing UK High Commissioner to South Africa, Nigel Casey. I'm Peter Attard Montalto, Head of Capital Market Research at Intellidex and also board member of the South African Chamber of Commerce. It gives me really great pleasure to welcome Nigel here, who is actually back in London, staying in a quarantine hotel. Just to establish some ground rules, this briefing is off the record. I know there are 1 or 2 press attending, so it's not for reporting, and hopefully will allow for a nice free-flowing conversation. Please do use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens, or raise a hand if you'd like to ask a live question. We'll try and leave some adequate time for some questions through the end. I'm sure there's lots to tap into Nigel's experience from his time in South Africa. And yes, do fire away the questions, but we will get going. Welcome, Nigel. Very good to see you and to share some time to review back your term of office in South Africa. But it was your second stint before you, or just as you were being appointed for this second stint. We had a lunch in the Corinthia, I remember, and I think I had a bit of a holding forth on diplomats and ambassadors and people coming in with sort of a rainbow Mandela view of South Africa, and you didn't. You came with a very I think pragmatic view, and that was because you had a first stint from '93 over the transition to democracy. So it'd be really interesting to start off to maybe just hear a few thoughts on what you learned through that first tour, how that put you in good stead for your second tour of duty in South Africa.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Great to see lots of familiar names on the participants list. Particular hello to Andrew and Peter Hain. Great to see you both. I just, as Peter said, I do have to ask, as you know, here in the UK, we are formally in a period of national mourning until Sunday morning after the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral. And so, as well as not reporting this in the media, I would ask that you restrain from your normal excellent instincts to sort of live tweet or stick on LinkedIn anything that I accidentally say that might be interesting. I will unusually for myself restrain myself from publicising this or anything I say, but that's because we are under a general injunction not to make news ahead of Saturday, please. Not that I expect to today, but just in case. Peter, yeah, look, I think I was very lucky, not just to have been to South Africa before, but to have been at a very particular time in its history. I did experience the Rainbow Nation moment, but I also saw the flip side of that and experienced the highs and lows of that period, because as I bored lots of you before with, I arrived in the middle of 1993 when things looked extremely grim and lots of people were talking about civil war. So what I took away from that, and what has stayed with me, and was I found very useful, a very useful corrective for my second tour to a lot of the sort of catastrophist comment that you get about South Africa, including from people who don't really believe it, that South Africa is a much more resilient country than lots of people give it credit for. It's kind of stared into the abyss in a big way several times before, and always managed to pull itself out and pick itself up and move on. And you know, I'm a firm believer that it can do that. And obviously, when I arrived here in spring 2017, or UK spring, South Africa was just coming to the end of another very tough period, and the story of my second time around has been about South Africa and its efforts to pull itself out of that position, and you know, get back onto a better path. So I did think that there were 1 or 2 sort of rainbow reminiscent type of moments. I've mentioned elsewhere. The feeling in Parliament in early 2018 when President Mandela was inaugurated, I think that was a little bit reminiscent of the sort of spirit of 1994, and people commented about that at the time. It goes to my point about the resilience and the ability to bounce back, and the reserves of knowledge that South Africa has been through tough times before. So yeah, when I was in India, everyone used to say, well, in India, nothing is as good as it seems or as bad as it seems. And that's probably a good motto for any country, but it seems a pretty appropriate one in South Africa as well.
Very true. And we've seen, I think, probably a developing of the UK relationship with South Africa, certainly over the last 25 years. How have you found it since 2017 compared to your first tour? It seems obviously there is a lot more technical assistance now. There's a lot more money flowing potentially. We'll come on some of the specifics of that in a minute. But how has been how do you think the relationship has been your second term?
It's been a completely different type of relationship. You know, when I was here last time, for the first half of my tour, before the '94 elections and the inauguration of the Mandela government, we didn't spend a lot of the time doing what we do now, which is engaging government and working with government on joint projects. Most of my time, I split my time. Half of it was sort of going around to Shell House, which was around the corner from our office in Johannesburg, trying to see anyone we could get to see from the ANC and various other parties based there. And the other half was administering our community project schemes. I would be driving in and out of Alexandra or Soweto or Tembisa or Thokoza on a daily basis. And that really gave us a connection with South Africa. And it was a very different type of relationship, different type of engagement. Not all, some of which I regret that we've lost. Now it's a much more formal government-to-government type of relationship, as you say. We have a lot of ambition for the relationship. I think definitely the last few years it's been on a firm upward trend with President Ramaphosa here. And we've had a prime ministerial visit. We've had a president in London. We're going to have him about to have him back again for the G7 and hopefully again for the big climate change conference in Glasgow in November. So it's all very different, but in a good way.
And how about doing diplomacy? There's been obviously a lot of turnover at DIRCO. It's been a challenging ministry and department to keep a track of. How have you felt your interactions with DIRCO have been on a personal level and government to government?
Yeah, so look, I one of the features of working in Pretoria, as you know, is that you get lots of diplomats who will moan to you about how difficult it all is and blah, 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 and you can't get to see people easily. And I had been kind of inoculated against that syndrome because I'd worked in India, I'd worked in Russia, and that sort of challenge of accessing a system and finding people to engage was not a new one. And I had a French colleague in Delhi who summed it up brilliantly. But when he said, because we had the same challenges there, he said the frustration of bureaucrats is not a strategy. It's a very good line to remember whenever. I banned myself from using the word frustrated, either verbally or on paper in any of our reporting, because you just have to work with what you've got and do things where you can. And that's what I've aimed to do, and not to lose sleep where it's not possible to do things.
There's obviously been a lot politically going on just after you arrived. We had NASREC. I remember we had a heated argument over breakfast before NASREC about the outcome. I think you got it right in terms of how things were won, but maybe the lack of reform I got right afterwards, or the lack of pace of reform. How do you think politics is looking at the moment in particular? Are you confident that Cyril will get a second term? We have a lot of noise at the moment, right? I'm sure in your cables, etc. There's a lot of hand holding, as I have to do in notes to the market on noise. But cutting through all that, where do you see the sort of the currents moving?
Yeah, so I've tried to sort of step back. You're under an obligation to your clients, Peter, to be giving them sort of updates every few days. I try and sort of step back a bit and try and only give London the big picture because they don't need day-to-day blow by blow accounts in the same way. And the trend has been undeniably vastly better since 2018 what I've seen our job and our challenge has been is identifying where we can support and encourage that. So we've invested a lot of time and effort helping the NPA get back on its feet, recapacitate itself so it can take on these big totemic cases, which everybody in South Africa is impatient to see progress on. We're looking elsewhere. The challenge that the president's rightly identified of rebuilding capacity in the government service. So the National School of Government is running some masterclasses which we've been supporting through LSE, and I'm a believer in institutions as a bureaucrat, and I think the president has rightly identified that as one of the top challenges, is to rebuild that institutional capacity, which, as he said, has been sort of hollowed out over recent years. So that's a long-term challenge. It's not going to be achieved in the one term of any president. It's a long-term project, and that's a direction of travel which we firmly support. We try not to get, as you know, sucked into domestic politics. That's not our business, and so we're careful not to pass comment on any administration in power. But the direction of travel, tackling corruption, restoring growth, these are all things which are really important, and ones which we look wherever we can to support in a practical way.
I mean, everything there ultimately is political, right? We've seen a lot of politicization around the judiciary, even this week. I mean, have you felt there was resistance or pushback, or somehow colonial forces coming to the fore in providing this sort of help and support? It doesn't seem that's really broken through that sort of narrative into the public domain, but has it behind the scenes maybe? Not really, no.
No. I can't claim that that's happened. I think, to be honest, everyone sees those nowadays. Everyone sees those kind of claims for what they are, and they don't really take them seriously, which is a healthy development. And so that hasn't been a problem for us in helping to support people like Shamila Batoi.
One of the most politically contested and complex, both policy and politics areas, has been the just energy transition, which the UK has dived in globally, but particularly in South Africa, sort of in head first. How have you found navigating the politics of that, the different role players, different stakeholders? You've been helped, of course, by COP26 happening in November. I mean, it's put something on the agenda, but this remains a very challenging issue to navigate. We're finding that working with banks and investors, etc. How has it been from the diplomatic side? I mean, you come with a lot of money as well. Your UK-SA Pact that you launched recently, as well as technical advice. So how have you found navigating the swirls of that in Pretoria?
So, I mean, this is a fascinating and utterly existential issue. I think it's essential to not just South Africa's contribution to fighting climate change, but really the whole restoration of sustainable growth in the economy, right? I mean, I know you've written about this a lot. The way we see it is actually there is an enormous opportunity in South Africa, for South Africa at the moment, in accelerating its transition away from dependence on coal to renewables and not just the wind and solar, which are the obvious places to go given cost, but other newer sources. We had a good event yesterday, which I think you were at, with Ibrahim Patel on the potential of the hydrogen economy. I mean, South Africa has enormous starting strengths in all these areas in terms of its manufacturing, its science base, its mining base, availability of key commodities here. And it can be a real hub, and these can be drivers for growth. But of course, energy transitions in every country are very politically difficult because a lot of jobs are tied up in the coal economy. And we've been through a very painful transition away from coal in the UK. We have some painful lessons learned in that process, which we've been happy to share. They're not all encouraging lessons in the sense that, you know, you can see in the UK that some areas of the UK which were heavily reliant on coal mining and coal power generation have successfully turned around and attracted car manufacturers or other investors to replace those jobs with highly skilled, well-paid jobs. But in other areas that hasn't happened. And so, you know, we totally get the anxieties of policymakers and political decision makers about how they manage that transition. But I think what is encouraging are two things. I mean, one is the South African debate is definitely moving. And in my time, Eskom has appointed an extremely capable CEO. I'm not the first in my time, but Andre de Ruyter is someone who I find very impressive. And the fact that he's coming under attack suggests that he's actually making progress. To me, it's a sign that he's tackling some of the really difficult vested interests in the sector, and you can expect a bit more of that noise. But you know, we think he gets it. We know we listen with great care to what he's saying, and find it very encouraging. We also think that the tone from the top has changed. If you look at what the president has said on the green economy, it's clear to me where he's coming from. Now, of course, you've got to get buy-in, which is broader than that. The ANC is a broad church. The trade unions and the mining unions are an important constituency, and so you can't just push the process forward without bringing all the key people along, and that's a difficult process, which we want to help South Africa with. And the other encouraging thing is frankly, we're not alone in doing this. Our German and French and other colleagues, and now the US, actually, now that the Biden administration has brought them back into the Paris Agreement, that we're all queuing up to see where we can help. And I think that there is an opportunity for South Africa in the more immediate sense in Glasgow, because there aren't many opportunities like the one in South Africa for achieving rapid decarbonisation. And a lot of people have written about the concept of not just a just transition, but the just transition transaction, very specifically the work that Javier Steyn and Anton and others have done. It makes a very good case, whether you buy into all the detail of how they've constructed it or not, for being ambitious about seeking that kind of a deal. I don't think it'll be on the table forever, because the pressure and the opportunity at Glasgow will be particularly heightened and intense. So I hope that in the course of the next 6 months, the debate in South Africa can move sufficiently quickly to enable South Africa to grab that opportunity, because I do feel it's there.
Definitely. I mean, there's a lot to unpack in that. I mean, you mentioned the just energy transition transaction, which, potentially for the whole economy is huge. For Eskom specifically, maybe of the order of 200 billion or more rand. What specifically does the UK government need to see specifically at COP26, particularly if we are talking about something that's time limited offer on the table? Does this need to be as simple as net zero in 2050, or is it about the credibility of getting there? What are you looking for in COP26 from South Africa?
I think there are two sides to it. So from the government side, all countries are being urged to come to the table with an enhanced nationally determined contribution, NDC. So the UK is one of many countries which has already issued theirs, and you've seen the ambitions that we've set out and legislated for. South Africa has just gone out for public consultation on its draft, and has pledged that it will publish the completed product before COP26. We would obviously like that to be done as soon as possible, because we're trying to generate positive momentum going into COP, which is not about negotiating a new treaty this time. It's about really upping global ambition to deliver on the Paris targets in substance. So a net zero pledge could be a part of that. A lot of governments have gone for that. We've done that. Lots of, there've been some surprising pledges from countries like China. So everybody's expressed it in their own language, but the direction of travel is pretty clear. So that's the sort of government level ambition that we're looking for from everybody coming to COP. On the specific issue of Eskom and financing a transition away from coal, I think you would need to see something that was a very specific investable proposal, which had been properly worked through and costed out. So it wasn't, because there you're really looking to development banks to be the ones to be putting the money on the table, and they need to see more than sort of top lines from government. They need bottom lines and very specific crunchy things to put money against. I think they're all willing. I know that from talking to the World Bank, the other official lenders, some of whom, like the French and German official lending development lending agencies, are already invested in Eskom. Some of them, that they are, they've had several rounds of this conversation already. So it's not new, but they need to see something more, which is a proposition. And as you've written about, there's lots of sort of noise about what Eskom's doing about its debts generally, and whether there's a sort of sovereign solution. But we need to know that, really. I think the banks and the investment institutions need to know that in order to know what they're putting their money against. But I think the willingness, the mandates of lots of funds, as you know, is very explicit. That they're there to back renewable energy, which achieves poverty reduction in Africa. And so, it is a great opportunity if it can be grasped.
I suppose that the fear is that South Africa comes with maybe an offer that is too cute, if you like. The role of gas has been a question in the Q&A on this. I think is a hugely politically contentious issue, and we've seen the EIB announce recently that it won't be funding any more gas projects. Some of the wording, like we saw in Sona on net zero, was quite fudged. What do you think on some of the specifics like that? How concrete does this really sort of need to be in terms of timeline, in terms of expounding on, for instance, a sovereign view on gas from South Africa? Because it feels like there are a lot of moving parts that South Africa is trying to navigate quite strategically for a range of vested interests.
Indeed, yeah. Look, I think South Africa set out its direction of travel in broad terms at government level. I think when it comes to the role of gas as a sort of transition fuel, I think there are, as you know, international differences of opinion on that, including from those who care deeply about the climate, about whether it's a good route to a greener economy if you're starting from heavy dependence on coal and you need something to fill the gap. The UK government has made a different decision, that we're not going to be in the business of funding fossil fuel projects overseas, so that we won't be one of the ones who would be backing that kind of strategy with money. But I still think that the case is there to be made to other institutions who haven't made that decision, or indeed South Africa could decide to finance gas development from its own resources. That's another option, I guess, depending on its choices. But I think, as you imply, that what the world will be looking to will be a sort of coherent narrative about how the whole thing fits together, and how South Africa gets from where it is now, which is something like 80% plus dependence on coal for energy generation, to a much greener economic picture by 2050 or earlier.
And in terms of the path to get there, the SA-UK Pact initiative is a lot of quite detailed, sort of technocratic work. Can you maybe just lay out a little bit about what that's about? It's a lot of underlying things like taxonomies and industrial plans and things like that, which are crucial, but maybe hard to understand from the bigger picture.
Well, a pact is a technical assistance program run by our business department. It's Partnership for Accelerating Climate Transitions is the full acronym. And so that, inevitably we're spending about £3.5 million through that program here in South Africa. But it's only one part of the picture, I would say. It's not the most important in terms of money, but it is providing some bits of technical assistance, which we hope will have a key unlocking catalytic effect, like the work we're doing with EE on hydrogen, for example, that you heard about yesterday. So it's a range of work like that, some of that with Eskom to support their own thinking and development of their own plans. We're also funding the World Bank to do some work, which is, again, to use another maybe familiar acronym, ESMAP work, specifically to help them with the very concrete challenge of how to repurpose existing coal-fired power stations in Mpumalanga, which are going to be decommissioned in the near future. So that is a very concrete piece of work which will prove the concept or otherwise of the just transition. So really important. And then as a sort of a broader diplomatic piece of work in our capacity as COP chair, we are sort of trying to make sure that we are sustaining a coherent international conversation with South Africa, bringing together other countries who care, our colleagues from France, from Germany, the World Bank, the other development finance institutions, the Dutch, Danes. There are a lot of people who are active in this space and contributing, and we want to make that as impactful as possible. So we're trying to contribute through diplomacy as well as money. In terms of the big money, I say that will be unlocked, I think, when the technical assistance that we and others are providing helps the South African system, and Eskom particularly, to develop investable plans of its own.
And in terms of the big money, you said being unlocked from the UK side, what's the sort of mix of that you see from sort of ODA or people like CDC or private sector? How do you see that mix coming through?
I mean, from our perspective, it's more likely to come through our contribution to the multilateral financial institutions, because the reason for that is simple: that we don't have a development bank akin to KfW or AFD. We do have CDC, but CDC has an explicit policy of not investing in state institutions. You may think that's been rather a wise policy in the recent past in this context, but it isn't going to change that. So I think our role is more likely to be around, as I say, the encouragement of the IFIs to be looking to lend in this space, and helping to support in a policy sense that kind of offer. But it's got to be South African owned. It's not going to be something. There's no point in having a sort of internationally developed plan. It's got to be one which we're supporting, but is wholly owned by South Africa, particularly if it's basically about taking on fresh lending, which is what it's likely to be.
You mentioned there things being South African owned, and this has come up a lot, obviously, in energy. We've had the bid window 5 for REAP RFP come out this week, a ratcheting up of social development, economic development requirements. I was wondering, for UK companies in general, but specifically in energy space, do you find people get this? Is this a sort of accepted fair part of doing business? There is obviously the flip side of that is also the localization requirements. There's been a lot of work on that. The EU missions have done a lot of research on that. Maybe from my perspective, it feels a little more negative where people are on that as opposed to some of the social development side. How do you find that sort of doing business, if you like, or South Africa specific sort of doing business, particularly in the energy space?
So I think in the energy space particularly, the first 4 rounds of REAP generated enormous interest, and it really proved that you don't need ODA or public money to generate and attract investment in this kind of project. for the reasons I gave. I mean, there's plenty of money out there looking for a good home, and the model that South Africa followed, you're putting its brightest minds from the Treasury into this particular team, which developed the REAP concept and framework, was incredibly successful and powerful in attracting that. So there was a lot of European, American investment in those first rounds, and I think you'll see more in every subsequent round that is run. So from that perspective, when you've got a very clear regulatory framework, and there's a very clear basis for investment, people will invest. Not because they're sentimental about South Africa, although people like investing, I find, in South Africa. They like an excuse to come on work visits to South Africa. They will invest where there's investable projects which have been properly worked out and properly prepared, and that's no different from any other country. I think the peculiarity of South African regulation, which does crop up a lot in our conversations with businesses, is around the transformation related regulation, obviously in particular, specifically BBBW, and the issue there is not that people have a problem with transformation. I mean, all British companies I talk to here have said the very first thing they all say is, we're totally committed to this agenda, we are contributing, and they tell you all the ways that they're doing it, through whether it's through ownership or whether it's through training and development or whatever it is. They will all have a policy which fits their business model and their ownership model. And the problem comes when the code is inflexibly interpreted, and these sort of more imaginative ways of contributing, rather than this very, very blunt instruments around ownership targets, are applied without any discretion. And so a lot of the work we end up trying to do to help companies is to try and get conversations going with the commissioner to live out the promise from Rob Davies and his successor Ebram Patel, that the code should be implemented flexibly in a way which supports investment, because I know that's what President Ramaphosa wants.
That's a very interesting point, because we're going on to this maybe tougher track with the current DTIC on some of these things, on localization, employee representation on boards, for instance. How far or how close do you think we are to, I don't know what we want to call it, a breaking point where it becomes much more challenging for investment in general on this front? Because people raise concerns, but it's never fully been a block, I would say, some of the sort of BE concerns, etc. Yeah,
look, it's only a very small number of investors have had to completely reassess the value of their investing in South Africa because of BBBW or other transformation relevant legislation or regulation. There tend to be other factors which are a problem before that, or are a green light or a red light to going ahead with projects. So it's a deal breaker in a few specific instances. For most, it's a cost. It's a cost of doing business, a compliance cost. It's a paperwork headache, but it's something people accept as part of the deal when you come and operate in South Africa. I think I don't get the sense that there is a sort of breaking point imminent. I know that businesses would always rather have less regulation and more flexibility about its interpretation. Paradoxically, one of the outcomes of the COVID crisis has been that localization in some aspects of the economy is back in vogue, right? I mean, we're all desperately trying to build up our manufacturing capacity again in vaccines, and in other aspects of the science that supports research into vaccines and development of vaccines. So that's not confined to South Africa. As we've left the EU, a lot of our own sort of supply chains and lots of bits of our economy are going to be adjusting to a new regulatory framework between the UK and the EU. So it's not unique to South Africa, but I think it's an issue worth being cognizant of. It's certainly one that investors should keep flagging to government. One thing I would say on that is that I find that in approaching the South African regulatory environment, there's a strong preference by companies to sort of keep quiet and try and work out problems through quiet chats. If only they could get to talk to the president, it'd all be fine. My advice to people has tended to be a little bit different from that, which is that actually South Africa is a robust democracy, and the ANC has a strong democratic tradition, and while it may not be comfortable, they don't mind good-natured, well-intentioned public disputation about issues like this. So if you really got a beef with any aspect of regulation, then get your industry body together to write, do some research and publish something credible, making the case and make the case publicly. And so the South African system does respond to well-argued, well-reasoned, evidenced arguments. And so I've often thought that it's a mistake to sort of try and, hide problems and try and fix them behind closed doors, because the president's time is limited, and not everyone's going to get that kind of access.
Now, that's a really interesting point. Coming out of your second tour, I think people always ask me why I have a business day column. You have to be in the public domain in South Africa, having fisticuffs on these debates, right? And I think that's as true of corporates as that is of analysts. But the point on BE, I think, was very interesting, which is it sort of reflects my experience. Is much more about direction of travel and certainty of direction of travel and policy certainty, as opposed to where exactly we are and the setup in and of itself. I suppose that leads me on to a question of more generalized reform, and you touched on this a little bit in what you said about Andre de Ruyter, but where do you feel in general, but then also specifically on the energy side, the sort of nodes of reform are, the secret people maybe British companies, British investors can be chatting to, understanding that there is maybe some light at the end of the tunnel behind the scenes on the reform in particular?
Yeah, well, I guess the heart of that now lies in the Operation Vulindlela team in the presidency, and so that's where to find the most closest people to the president, working to his agenda on all these big ticket issues, that some of which we've talked about, and including things like spectrum licensing and mining regulation, all sort of big stuff that needs to move to generate, not just for its own sake, but to generate the wider confidence you're talking about and give a sense of direction of travel, predictability, and optimism about future growth. So I think that's where you will find it. Of course, the style of governance in South Africa is that lots of discussions happen in sort of semi-formal or informal processes. There's lots of commissions, advisory bodies. Not always clear how much of them are being influential, but you get occasional glimpses that some of the things that are said in some of these advisory panels do filter directly into ministers' thinking, and so I do think they all have a value and they're worth engaging in, even if it doesn't feel always very direct. I said the problem, as in any government, so I worked in Number 10 before I came to this job, and what people outside those kind of offices don't often realize is how small they are, necessarily, because the president or prime minister can only cope with having a certain number of people in her or his team around them, and in the case of Number 10, it's a very small building, so you have a small team of people who are working around the clock, and there's limited bandwidth, and you need to find other ways of achieving sort of traction. And I think one of them, as I say, is to be a little bit less scared of entering public debate in an open society where where it's normal and it's a regular feature. You have to have a bit of a thick skin because you'll get brickbats, but that's normal if you want to do business here.
Oh, exactly, and a sign that people are engaging. Exactly. I like the brickbats after my business day columns. But your point on formal structures is interesting. NEDLAC is something that I completely can't get my head around, but it's a crucial thing one has to engage with. Uniquely sort of South African talk shop as one example. But no, I think people overestimate the number of people sometimes around power. When we do sort of stakeholder analysis and stuff, there are remarkably few people actually you come up with that are real touch points on that front.
I would say, Peter, that one thing that I think is a real strength in South Africa, although South African business people would be just as happy to moan about it themselves, is that the NEDLAC structure and the general engagement between business and government, and certainly in the Ramaphosa era, the basically supportive stance of business towards a government's agenda is a real strength. It's not every country has that relationship between government and business. In the UK, that relationship's been pretty stress tested in recent years. In South Africa, you have a sort of gut patriotism, I would say, amongst the business community. They want South Africa to work, and that is infectious, and it means that very senior business people are prepared to sit through hours and hours of NEDLAC discussions, which in the UK I suspect their counterparts might not be quite so enthusiastic about, and they are they're the ones who give their time. They offer staff to government when they can, and not for mercenary reasons, but because they genuinely want the countries to succeed and see this as the best way of helping achieve that. So I think that is probably an unheralded strength of the South African system.
No, very true. A lot of I think unrecognized capacity deployment beneath the scenes. We've seen that in infrastructure most recently, sort of 50-odd underpaid, semi-retired people being deployed into the infrastructure and investment office to help start move the dial from the private sector. But I think that links to a question that's come up in the chat on how much you feel really foreign governments, foreign diplomats, and foreign companies, I suppose, have had influence, have been able to move the dial in generalized reform debates. There's always specifics like energy spectrum, which has been more of a challenge, maybe.
So I think this is one area where the relationship between foreign governments, including my own, or the British government, I should say, and South Africa has radically changed, and absolutely rightly. So in the mid-90s, South Africa was a very internationalized issue. The ANC had wanted to internationalize it to help bring about the international pressure that helped to end apartheid. And so when I was last working here, we and a couple other embassies were, right at the heart of trying to help the transition happen, and came out of it quite proud of having to help in a way with that process. Now the relationship is quite properly totally different. We're having a regular government-to-government relationship, I don't come here expecting to be changing South African government policy. That's not what foreign diplomats do. We can make our case. We can help try and nudge things where we can try and help in a practical way, where we see South African policies that we think that we should support because they're good for South Africa, they're good for our relationship, they're good for our interests. But we are not in the mold that we were in the days of the sort of struggle years, where necessarily the issue was much more internationalized. I think in some of the commentary about the role of foreign governments in the investment climate here, maybe there's a bit of a hangover from the 1990s of people expecting the UK or other countries to sort of come in and sort of throw their weight around. That doesn't work in South Africa. It's not our style. It's not. It's as I said, it doesn't. I've yet to see anybody else doing it successfully. So We try where we can, but these decisions are basically for South African political decision makers, not for us.
No, exactly. I mean, there's a romanticized sort of view that, you know, CIA is running around, you know, managing the whole of South Africa. Unfortunately, it's not true. Much more interesting, maybe there was. In terms of some maybe switching to the future, you know, as you leave South Africa, what's something you're optimistic about, and something maybe you worry about, or you're pessimistic about for the next, say, 5 years or so?
So look, I think I've been lucky. I came to South Africa after a period where my predecessor said had a tough time generating much sort of top-level political engagement between London and Pretoria. That's changed completely in my time, so I'm optimistic that we're on a much better track, that South Africa is well led, and that there is a direction of travel which is new and welcome and positive, and that, you know, so for all those reasons, plus the resilience I talked about earlier, yeah, that gives you a sort of fundamental basis for optimism, despite all the sort of day-to-day problems that you can see. And as diplomats, you tend to focus on the problems rather than things that are going well, because that's what you're paid to try and help resolve. In terms of you know, my worries, well, I mean, I try not to worry obsessively about things which I can't control. So I guess you know, my main worry, one of my main worries is when I'll be able to get back as a paying tourist and enjoy the places. I know you've been itching to do yourself, and lots of other people on this call will be probably asking themselves the same question.
Sure, very, very self-interested worry there, but yeah, we all share it. It's maybe some quick fire questions where we move some questions from the audience. And someone's actually asked us, I think, see, what are you going to miss most about Pretoria? I had a good group of friends in the diplomatic community in Pretoria, and we had some fun. And I took up the game of golf again after a very long interval. And so I'm not sure I'll be playing that again for a long time. But for those reasons, I will miss Pretoria. I confess I may miss Cape Town even more. There we go. And your favorite red and white wine from South Africa?
My favorite red, well, we drank as much Optima as I could get our hands on, and on the whites, I did the De Morgans, and Chenin Blanc was a favorite. Definitely,
that's the right answer. Well done. And
I don't know if Wendy's on the call.
And your favorite Cape Town and Joburg or Pretoria restaurant?
So in Joburg, I mean, for atmosphere, everyone goes to Marble, which is great fun, and you know, proper diverse Joburg. Actually, I thought for food, I would recommend Mastro Antonio, which is a full of movers and shakers, and very good Italian. In Cape Town, I mean, it's Cape Town, you're sort of spoiled for choice. But again, I mean, we were devotees of Klein Constantia. But I also discovered very late on a Tavola, which is a very unpretentious Italian in Claremont, opposite one of the hospitals, which is in a terrible location for a restaurant, but it's absolutely superb food. So if you're ever in that neighborhood, I would recommend it.
And your favorite tourist attraction?
Well, I always tell people that I think Cape Point is a very special place. It's a bit of a corny one, but it has a very special quality of the sort of light. You feel like you're at the end of the continent, even if geographers would quibble. But anyone who's been to Cape Agulhas would know what I'm talking about. Cape Point is, if you can get there before the crowds, is a very special place.
Exactly, agreed, definitely. Cool. That leads us on to a key audience question, which has come up a lot. Is when can we go and do all of this? We can go down anytime, South Africa. It's coming back is the problem. You sneakily hid how your room looks in the Best Western in Heathrow to explain Nigel is now flown back. So what's happening next from the UK government side? The traffic lights. How does South Africa fit into all of that?
Yeah, no, well, this has been obviously sort of my number one issue with COVID and the associated travel issues. It's created, as I've said elsewhere, I've done a lot of my last years as a sort of travel advisor, immigration consultant. The truth is that we would love to get travel reopened as soon as we possibly can, but the key constraint at the moment is the concern about new variants, and South Africa's been doubly unlucky because, first of all, thanks to its brilliant scientists, it sequenced the genome sequenced what's now become known as the South Africa variant, whether it started here or not, in Port Elizabeth in November. And then the second piece of bad luck was that in some very limited evidence, that's all the evidence anyone has to go on so far, it seemed as though the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine is less effective against that particular variant. Now, that is the reason why South Africa got stuck on a red list on Christmas Eve, and then why we gradually had to add to the red list all the other countries in the neighborhood and beyond where that particular variant took hold. So it's not about the absolute numbers of cases, which are very low, as those of you in South Africa know at the moment. It's about the fact that the variant has the potential to undo all the benefits of the successful vaccination program in the UK, because if there's no point in our vaccinating up to herd immunity in the UK and then finding that all that good work is undone by a new variant that the vaccine is not so effective against. So the problem we have at the moment is lack of data. You know, the data on which the decision by the South African authorities not to use Oxford AstraZeneca was taken was very limited. I'm not saying that as a criticism. It's just that that's all there was. And so both the vaccine manufacturers and our scientists at Porton Down are trying as fast as possible to come up with some better evidence about the efficacy of the various vaccines. Some of the data from other vaccines suggests that some of the other vaccines will be more effective against it. That's why the South African government's gone for Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson. And I hope that's right. But we need the data before we can be confident about opening up travel. And in the meantime, it is going to remain difficult. I don't hugely recommend the experience of hotel quarantine to any of you. It's not a lot of fun, but and I would say travel if it's essential. But if not, if you can work from wherever you are, I would stay there. I hope this disruption will be limited, but that's a hope. It's not. The other positive thing that I cling to is that the vaccine manufacturers are working at speed to develop new variants of vaccines specifically designed to ensure high efficacy against new variants. And so that the hope is that by the autumn, UK autumn, when we administer the booster shots, the booster shot will be a new version of the vaccine, a bit like a new flu vaccine, which will be specifically effective against new variants. And at that point, if that is working, then I think you can be reasonably confident that we can start opening up again. But it's not going to be a week or two, I'm afraid.
Sure, and we're seeing some of the trials about start some of those boosters in South Africa shortly. So hopefully some good news on that, ready for the South African summer at the end of the year, maybe. But South Africa's losing $10 billion or more on an annualized basis at the moment, which you can really see even at a macro level, let alone the micro level. So clearly hugely important.
I feel this personally, not just because I'm in a quarantine hotel, but because I had hoped to carry on my tour until the British and Irish Lions tour in July, August, and then for that to be kind of joyous occasion with tens of thousands of British and Irish high spending fans traveling all over South Africa, spending lots of money. So it's it's great that the tour is happening. The rugby matches are going to get played, but it looks very difficult in terms of fan participation, I'm afraid, which is a great pity.
Sure. There's a question that's coming from a few people on what the merger of the FCO and DFID means for South Africa and the relationship with South Africa. That obviously happened relatively recently.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Interesting. No. Well, obviously, it's been a big part of my life. We have done an awful lot of work over the last 6 months since the merger was announced and happened from the 1st of September. Because as you all know from corporate life, mergers are a process, not an event, and they need a lot of work if they're going to succeed. Secondly, the other thing that's been happening, which is important, is that the Prime Minister has been very clear that he wants a completely integrated whole of government approach under ambassadors and high commissioners around the world, even more than we had already. So we have been working very hard over the last few months to redesign our structures to properly integrate FCO and DFID, and also to do everything we possibly can to eliminate any incoherence between other government departments. We have 11 government departments working on our platform in South Africa. In other posts around Africa, it can be even more than that. So that's been a large part of our effort. But I really hope that the impact on South Africa is either negligible or positive, because I do think I have seen our policy in some places and instances less joined up and coherent than it could have been in previous years. I think in particular bringing together the incredible expertise and knowledge and resource of DFID built up over the years since it became an independent department in 1997, plus the foreign policy, also the policy engagement capacity, the contacts of the FCO will be a powerful combination. I think will make us better and help us. What I hope it will do is make it easier for us when partner governments say, when we ask them, where they would like our partnership, they will have an answer. We'll find it easier to deliver on that. So I hope the impact will be felt in a positive way. I think in the short term, we have an extra challenge which we are also dealing with, as you're aware of, the decline in our ODA spend in 2021-22 for two reasons. One is our GNI has gone down because of COVID, and secondly, because the government took a decision to temporarily lower the amount of our GNI spent on ODA from 0.7 to 0.5%, while our finances recover. So short term, we are having to cope with that. It's not going to make a huge difference in South Africa. Our priority programs are going to happen, and all of our key work with South Africa is going to be sustained.
No, interesting message. Very different departments. I've always found interacting, but I think that's, as you say, one of the strengths, certainly. Just to let everyone know, we're going to run on to sort of 1:45-ish. There's certainly a few more questions coming through. I'm just going to bring in Sharon now. Sharon is the head of the South African UK Chamber of Commerce. Go ahead, Sharon.
Nigel, it was absolutely wonderful to listen to you. I remember the first time I met you in the House of Commons, I think it was, or what is it, the house in the government house in Cape Town, about half an hour before I broke my arm. I'll never forget those moments. So it's all your fault. You obviously made a serious impression. Just listening to you and looking at the chat line we've got running inside the chamber at the moment on a WhatsApp group. And I think if I just summarize the comment made by the members is your successor has monster boots to fill. You are leaving a massive gap leaving South Africa. We are all going to miss you from that perspective. I know we can't ask you where you're going and what you're doing, but we'll keep tabs on you. We'll keep in close contact from the Chamber's perspective. The rugby, I have to say, I'm with you on that one. And when you talked about the optimism of the South African people, the resilience of the South African people, and then you referred to your wine preferences, I have a few I'll contest with you. I think South Africa is very much a full glass mentality rather than even a half full mentality. And I think that's what gets South Africa through so much of its challenges that it does have. And it's lovely to listen to you talk about South Africa in the positive way that you have done. Question I'd like to ask is, we talk about South Africa having a good rule of law, having a good constitution, having a good judiciary system. We also hear about corruptions and about the challenges that occur at the government level when they're big projects. I mean, last year it was full of all the issues that we had to deal with. I would like to take that from a business perspective, and now we're talking about an investor coming in, a big corporate in South Africa, stakeholders' involvement. South Africa has one of the best corporate governance codes in terms of King 4, which has been vastly upgraded from King 1 to 3. And to what extent is that actually now gaining teeth in a business community and helping to try and reduce some of the negativities that do exist and to sort of bolster the positivities so that we do support the investment into the country because it has got the best code in the world? And to what extent is that actually supporting the efforts of the UK and the rest of people like ourselves trying to get investment and trade with the country?
Thanks, Sharon. Great to see you, or hear you anyway.
Oh, they can't, I'm sorry. I'm
Peter,
waving, by the way.
Peter, do you want me to just answer that now, or do you want to stand first?
No, now is fine. Not the South African tradition of many questions.
Good. So just to say at the beginning, thank you very much. It was very kind what you said. It's not a secret where I'm going next. I'm going to be back in London next. Our children have important exams coming up over the next couple of years, and so we're keen to be here. So we're coming home, and I'm going to be heading up a new directorate in the new FCDO, responsible for Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. So I think that's the FCDO's way of telling me they think I've been on holiday for 4 years, which, as you all know, is far from the truth. But it will nevertheless not be dull. I'm also happy to tell you that my successor, although I can't name them yet, is someone who has a really strong, I'm not just saying that, stronger than I brought this job, background in promoting trade and investment in some of our most important markets internationally. And so I don't just say this for the record, but I know they will be excellent and proactive on that score. And as I say, probably have more imaginative and better ideas to bring to the table from their recent experience than I did. So I do think I know I'll encourage them to be in touch both with SACC and with the British Chamber in Joburg early on to sustain that engagement we've had. So thank you. You asked an interesting question, actually, Sharon, about sort of corporate integrity. I mean, I guess one unpleasant surprise for everybody here in 2017 was not just learning about the extent of corruption in government, but in uncovering the extent to which bits of the private sector had been sucked into that or voluntarily supported it. And I think that I know for those of you in corporate life in South Africa must have been quite a blow, because it had always been one of the sort of strong arguments for investment in South Africa, that whatever was going on in government, the private sector had integrity and was not corrupt, and so I think it's prompted quite a lot of soul searching and forced people to go beyond beyond what's in the formal codes and really think about ethics and behaviour. And so I think I'm sure that lots of you will have been through that experience in your own environments. I think when I first arrived, the South African auditing profession was rated #1 in the world, and it's taken a bit of a hit since then with everything that's come out. And so the Steinhoff debacle was which is separate from the state capture saga, was kind of reinforced the importance of really internalizing and acting on that agenda, not just taking refuge in the idea that everything in the private sector was fine. So look, I think, as elsewhere, that South Africa has the potential to come out stronger from that experience, having learned some tough lessons. They're not unique to South Africa, but they I think they do help with the sense that I talked about earlier, that South Africa is all in it together, whether it's government or business, and that nobody should pretend to be sort of on the whole high moral ground all the time, but rather look for ways to cooperate and mutually support each other for outcomes which are good for South Africa and good obviously for individual businesses as a consequence. So I think it has been a tough period in that respect. You're right to raise it. I think it goes beyond formal codes, important as they are, to really asking whether business regulatory bodies, particularly whether they're voluntary self-regulatory type arrangements, are really doing the job that they need to do to preserve South Africa's reputation in those important respects.
Now, leads on nicely to a question from Peter Hain, actually, that he emailed in. To what extent is President Ramaphosa able to root out corruption in the public sector as he wishes to do? And I suppose you can maybe throw in a cheeky forecast on if you see Ace Magashule stepping aside shortly.
Well, thanks for the offer. I mean, that is really your job, Peter. But look, I think the overall intent and direction of travel is clear, right? The president has put his cards firmly on the table. He's backed that up by appointing some very good people to some key positions. I mentioned Shamila Batoy, but she's not the only person in that category. And he's further backing it up by helping capacitate those institutions below the level of leadership. So the NPA can't work with just one good person at the top. It needs deputy prosecutors and lots of other senior staff who are gradually being put into the system. So that is going to take time, and large, complex prosecutions take time. It's just a fact, and we have to be patient with that. Although people are rightly impatient for action. But if I think back to the situation on the day I arrived, which I think was a week after Pravin Gordhan had been fired for just going on a trip to London to drum up investment in South Africa, to where we are now with the year plus of testimony at the Zondo Commission, the former president's trial finally about to start, the charges laid against ANC Secretary General. I mean, these are things which would have been pretty unthinkable when I arrived. So one has to stand back and recognise progress, accepting that we'd all love it to be quicker.
Interesting. I'm going to come to Andrew now. Let me see if this works, hopefully. There we go, Andrew. You can unmute, I think.
Thank you, Peter. And Nigel, I'm going to miss you very much as well. Gutted I've not been able to be out with you since 2018. First of all, because of Brexit, and there's no parliamentary capacity to release members of parliament. So we had a negative majority, as you might remember, and then COVID. So it's been far too long. Nigel, I noted with interest on a note from the Foreign Secretary and the Chancellor to the World Bank recently, that there was a line in that said that there are twice as many jobs in energy efficiency and renewables as there are in fossil fuel industries. And that just struck me as a pretty bold, powerful statement. I don't quite know where the evidence for it came from, but I remember Gwede Mantashe saying completely reasonably, where are the jobs going to come from for my miners, which is a very fair and a very good and reasonable, proper question, actually. So I just wonder if you could say a little bit more on the pathway. Do we need to help the TVETs a bit more with skilling people to, install photovoltaic cells and wind turbines and so on? What's the actual route map and the practicality of getting a coal miner into a renewables job?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Excellent question. And likewise, I'm sorry not to have seen you. I must say I haven't heard the phrase negative majority before. That's a good one. I should remember that. Your question goes to the heart of the work which we are supporting at Eskom via the World Bank, which is the ESMAP piece of consultancy we're doing, which is really looking at real live testing of this theory of the just transition at a number of the coal-fired power stations which are being decommissioned over the next couple of years in Mpumalanga. And the concepts being tested there are around replacing jobs in coal mining and at coal plants with a mixture of jobs in the energy sector and jobs beyond the energy sector. On the former, the broad concept, and there's features in some of the thinking around the just transition transaction, for example, you would try and ensure that you retained some of the skills that you had in those plants by building some of the building blocks of the renewables economy in the same places. For example, you would build, you might build a site for manufacturing the towers for wind turbines, as well as putting in a small scale or a large scale solar facility. Now, the solar facility, the people might say, well, for optimal power, you should put your solar in the Northern Cape rather than Mpumalanga. But actually, if you've been to Mpumalanga, you'll know it's where the Kruger Park is. It's pretty sunny compared to the UK, where we are doing pretty well on solar despite a lot of cloud cover. So you're partly looking at jobs in the energy sector, but recognizing that that's never going to be the whole solution. You also look at other industries where there's comparative advantage, and Mpumalanga has gone gangbusters this last year, exporting agricultural produce to anyone who's buying it, US, Europe, China. Incredible statistics on production of macadamia nuts, avocados, oranges, other citrus. And they actually recorded a net growth of something like 17% in agricultural exports in 2020, despite COVID, which is just a phenomenal figure. Now, of course, Gwede Mantashe would say, well, those are not skilled, high-paid jobs in agriculture. But then you can look at other parts of the agri-processing chain and see if you can go higher up the value chain. So that's the sort of nascent thinking, and I mean, it is essential to get through that and prove the concept, and that's what that work that Eskom are trialing is all about. Because if it can be proved to work at that scale, then it can be scaled up. And there is a lot of skepticism, you're right, about how many long-term jobs there are building solar plants or wind power beyond the initial manufacturing phase. But I think that the answer to that is that it needs to go broader and needs to include an element of domestic South African manufacturing of components for the renewables industry.
Thanks very much for the question, Andrew. I think that's really interesting, knotty issue to finish on. We're doing a lot of work with the finance sector, thinking about a lot of these things. And I think a lot of the work the UK government's doing and that you, Nigel, have helped to put in place in the last few years is about providing the foundations for this highly complex problem, which one can't totally map, but can provide the foundations for much faster jobs intensive growth going forwards. So excellent. I think we've covered all the questions. Maybe just some last thoughts from you, Nigel, before we sign off.
Oh, well, gosh, I just want to say thank you to you, Peter, and to everyone on this call. I do think all platitudes aside, South Africa is a special place. It's the only place I've come back to a second time as a diplomat. I know I'm going to come back a lot more because my family are now firm fans of South Africa, and I do think that my parting thought is that although everybody says, oh, South Africa can't rely on sentiment, and don't expect people to invest just because of Nelson Mandela. There is nevertheless an international interest in seeing South Africa succeed that is very rare, that very few other countries benefit from, and I think South Africa can and should really harness. It doesn't mean it's a free pass, and as you say, that it doesn't mean that you can do things in terms of business environment and expect investors to just come anyway. But it does give you an edge, and I think South Africa under President Ramaphosa is certainly a lot better place to exploit that than it was a few years ago. And I really hope that will succeed. And all power to the elbow of those who are working incredibly hard on the investment drive, which, as you say, is being fueled by lots of hardworking secondees from the private sector. So best of luck to them, best of luck to all of you, and I look forward to seeing you back in sunshine in South Africa, relaxing this time with a glass of wine, and we can then gossip about what a terrible job my successors do.
Exactly, no, on Cape Point with some Chenin Blanc, definitely. But no, thank you very much, Nigel, for joining us today. Thank you from Intelledex and from the South African Chamber of Commerce, particularly the Chamber of Commerce, for your role over the years in the advisory board and helping British business and British investors, and likewise South Africa, to build those bilateral relations. And thank you everyone for joining the call. There'll be a recording afterwards. And we wish Nigel all the very best for the next steps. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everybody.